What is one invention that we'd be better off without? Fun fact, actually not fun at all fact, you are more likely to get other lung cancers than mesothelioma from asbestos exposure. Mesothelioma just is a slam dunk for lawyers since you basically can only get it from asbestos exposure. Technically, mesothelioma isn't a lung cancer, although it typically develops in the tissue that holds the lungs in place. But you're not wrong, it's almost guaranteed that the cause was asbestos exposure, and there's a good chance that exposure was due to or precipitated by some degree of corporate negligence or dishonesty. Sadly, due to the various types of asbestos that were predominantly used, and the diverse range of exposure sources, a lot of mesothelioma restitution ends up with corporations fighting it out over how much each of them should be liable, and often, after confirmed diagnosis, the plaintiff has at most a very gross and painful year or two left, and in my experience seldom lives to see a decision made in their favor. The problem is, the corporations aren't necessarily wrong to dispute their varying degrees of culpability. And often it's like they're saying, yeah, okay, we were all beating on this guy, but you were the one who got all crazy and brought out the lead pipe, and I think that's when you killed him. And when you factor in splitting hairs over which cancer is the main boss cancer, it gets even hairier. Mesothelioma tort law was the saddest thing I've worked with, I think, and it's why I abandoned pursuing a career in law. Spent a couple years working in mesotort as well. It was so hard. You build relationships with these clients and then they just die. I still think of many of them often. Your post was all spot on. Real talk, I never thought about the lawyer/client relationship with meso cases. My family was involved with the case for my father. He basically got it started and we ended up getting a decision 2 years after his death. Long story short, thanks for thinking about the ones people lost. Even though the chances you were on my father's case is slim to none, thanks for remembering the lost. As a kid, I used to tinker with electronics, and my dad got me an asbestos tile to use as a work mat for soldering. I'd set it on the table where it would endure abuse from a soldering iron along with other scrapes and scratches from wires, tools, and equipment. Then I'd take it back to my room and toss it behind the door until the next time. That thing had beat up fraying corners and edges, but it dutifully prevented me from burning my mom's kitchen table. That was 40-something years ago, and between that and holding leaded solder in my mouth while I held wires on one hand and a soldering iron in the other, I feel fortunate to be alive. The thing about asbestos is not inherently a problem. It only becomes a problem when it becomes aerosolized. That's why ops specifically mentioned popcorn ceilings, because it would super difficult to safely remove. Just being around and touching it is fine as long as you aren't inhaling it. There was a tifu about a guy removing tile in his house that ended up being asbestos tile. He didn't realize it till after he had grounded a bunch down into a fine powder that he dispersed all through his house. The tile itself is fine, it is the powdered form being all over that sucks. A smaller but related issue is calling different businesses and hearing a robot on the end. To navigate through all their hoops, especially when it's a voice response system, and only find that you landed in the wrong section and have to do the whole thing over, is extremely frustrating. For questions about your account, press 1. Oh, your question was about billing, you should have pressed 2 for billing. Oh, your question about billing is why you were billed twice, you should have pressed 3 for dispute resolution. Oh, your dispute was due to a processing error, you should have pressed 4 for bookkeeping. Oh, bookkeeping only has access to your account for records and inquiries, so we can tell you your payment history and the like, so if you want to know why you were billed twice, you should have pressed 1 for questions about your account. But the American Polygraph Association, henceforth referred to as a bunch of people whose careers and livelihood depend on polygraphs being effective, say it's effective. And they're unbiased, right? They're the experts. Once I had to take a polygraph because some things had come up missing at work. Anyway, the polygraph guy starts off the session asking me what I thought about his profession. I said I think it's pseudoscience. He immediately copped a shitty attitude and was quite rude the whole session. Ended up losing that job because he called my manager and complained that I was an asshole. I didn't even fail the test lol. Sometimes fishermen will just toss bad nets into the ocean. If they're in an area with a strong current, they'll move on their own and become whirling nets of death. They'll catch anything they come into contact with and kill it. Divers have reported seeing these nets with the skeletons of thousands of sea life still stuck. Could they drive a remote vehicle around the area? Maybe something like a road roller that works like a Roomba and just sweeps back and forth over a dangerous area. We actually use something a lot bigger. Mine-sweeping trucks use spinning flails to beat the ground in front of them. If they hit a mine, they can tank the explosion and keep rolling. They'll drive back and forth over the area like a lawn mower, clearing entire fields this way. It's slow, and not perfectly safe, but better than anything that involves humans walking the field or using disposable drones until they set off a mine. I believe that current US policy is that they no longer use mines that do not self-detonate outside of the Korean DMZ. There is an exception carved out for special operations forces, but those guys aren't dropping minefields like anybody here is thinking. The US has had a policy of documenting the locations of each mine they lay and recovering them since at least the 80s. The only exception to that rule are mines that self-detonate. Source: I've filled out target folders for minefields. We even had them in Desert Storm if needed. Playing in minefields and blowing stuff up were the two highlights of my job. Autoplay videos, especially in non-video streaming websites. Nobody asked for them, yet so much work is getting put into making it a web standard. Just fucking stop. Edit: thanks for the responses. Yes, I'm aware that there's ways to block it. And I guess, thank God there's a standard. Because it can make it easier to block. The key point is that nobody asked for videos to play in the background of news sites, so why does it exist? Now there are entire news stories that are actually really ads just without overtly advertising a product. They merely craft a story which leads to learning about a product or seeing it mentioned, or even some as sophisticated as if you look into details of the story will lead you to a product. It's insidious. As someone in IT, this is so goddamn infuriating. Search engines have been poisoned with this crap. Used to be able to Google an error code and you'd easily find a page describing what it means and thus you could work out what to do to resolve it. Now, it's filled with to fix $error code. Follow these steps. Now download Magical Fixame Bob to scan your system for errors. Either that, or you end up on some forum full of people being unhelpful twats with canned responses or just refusing to answer the question. The guy who invented it proved to the media that it was totally safe by ingesting lead and having them do a urine test on him. Since lead stays in your body forever and isn't cleared through excretions, of course his urine test was totally clear. He also invented CFCs for use in refrigeration, and thus contributed mightily to the depletion of the ozone layer. But in the end, he developed polio and died horribly, strangled to death by a bed he invented to help get in and out of bed due to the disease. Forgive me for being scant on details, it's a while since I read about it, but basically he was strangled to death by a rope and pulley contraption he designed to help him while bedridden with some malady. The Wikipedia page is probably more informative. Bill Bryson's fantastic book A Short History of Nearly Everything is where I first learned about Thomas Midgley and his contributions to humanity. He mentions it in that. Those ads are banned in Canada, so whenever I watched an American channel it was just such a culture shock that they were allowed to advertise those things like that. A roommate of mine watches a lot of court TV and the ads on that are just aimed at seniors trying to scam them constantly. It's insane. We have LED traffic lights here and the glare from them is ridiculous. I can understand them on high-speed roads where seeing a red light from a distance matters, but they've installed them in small 30-mile-per-hour roads/residential areas. It's like looking at a red/green traffic flare. Same as the LED streetlights that have recently turned night into day on my street. Completely unnecessary. The sodium light level was fine, and now we need blackout curtains at the front of the house, with something to pin them at the sides of the window. I get that the LEDs are energy efficient, but they could be a tenth as bright and still do the job. When using blackout curtains, the best thing I have found for making them stick to side of window or wall pending the size is some magnets. I bought some round ones with a small hole in the middle made for mounting to an object and then get some even smaller ones and put the curtain between the two. Bang, no more light escapes the side. We started with sodium streetlights, then they switched us to some LED lights that are brighter than the old sodium lights, but don't look directly at the light or your eyes will melt bright. About on par with having a giant incandescent light. My hatred comes from the fact that they're now replacing the LEDs with some weird blacklight shit. Not an actual blacklight, but it makes everything blue, and the shadows are harsh and pitch black, and I can't see shit because everything looks all warped like I'm in the upside down. The one smart TV we have, Vizio brand, wouldn't even display a picture until we connected it to the Wi-Fi and downloaded an update of some kind. It's never going to be used as a smart device, and was immediately disconnected from the internet and connection forgotten the moment we could get our Xbox to show up on screen.